The video filmed at a major Canadian airport quickly went viral across all global social media networks. It captured an Italian man concluding his tour of Asia, weeping as he delivered a shocking confession. China was a nightmare, but Canada was his salvation. His name was Marco Rossi, a 30-year-old from Italy. This was his first time setting foot in Asia. What overwhelming difference did Marco experience between the humiliation he suffered in China and the astonishing reality he witnessed in Canada? How could two places on the same continent be so fundamentally different? Let's immediately explore the reason for his tears and the Canadian truth that shocked the world. Marco Rossi was a typical Eurocentric 30-year-old from Milan, Italy. In his worldview, Europe was the pinnacle of civilization, and Asia, well, it was merely an underdeveloped region. Asia is just a collection of mass markets, isn't it, Marco often scoffed. China's economic growth was undeniable, with the world's second highest GDP and advanced high-speed rail networks. To Marco, however, it was just a symbol of the nouveau riche. They probably think money gives them the right to do anything but true. Culture and character are something else entirely, he thought. Marco also held complex feelings about Canada. Having a slight familiarity with North American culture, he'd heard of Canada's renowned politeness and beautiful landscapes, but he somewhat looked down on its modern existence. I've heard it's a polite country, but now it's probably just synonymous with maple syrup and bland manners. Compared to Europe's history, North America is still a child. When his girlfriend Francesca gave him an Asian trip for his 30th birthday, Marco was reluctant. Tourist spots in developing regions won't even compare to Europe's leftovers, he declared to his friends before the trip. China and Canada both speak English or Chinese, right? They'll probably be similar, crowded, loud, and the service will be casual at best. Statistically, Marco felt his intuition was correct. In global tourism satisfaction rankings, Italy consistently ranked in the top 5, while China was 47th. Even Canada, despite its reputation, was 26th. See, the data proves it, Marco said confidently. In international airport service rankings, Rome's airport in Italy was highly ranked in Europe. Asian airports will surely be chaotic. Marco was completely unaware that this entire rigid stereotype would be shattered by the end of his journey. The night before departure, Marco told Francesca, "As a cross-cultural experience, it might be interesting, but ultimately, home is best." The next morning, Marco headed to Milan's airport with a casual air, his suitcase packed with Italian pride and superiority. At that moment, he had no idea that the reality awaiting him would fundamentally overturn his entire life view. The moment he stepped off the plane at Shanghai Pudong International Airport (PVG), Marco's expression changed. His body, already exhausted from the 14-hour flight, was hit with further stress. The airport was huge, but its size only contributed to the confusion. "Excuse me, where is immigration?" Marco asked an airport official in English. The official, looking annoyed, mumbled something in Chinese, waved his hand dismissively, and walked away. "Wait, hold on!" Marco rushed after him, but the officer didn't even turn his head. Such rudeness was unimaginable in Europe. In an Italian airport, staff, even when busy, would smile and point the way. But in China, the situation was drastically different. Finally finding the immigration hall, Marco was stunned by the sight. There was no queue, only hundreds of travelers pushing and shoving to get ahead. What is going on? Marco felt bewildered. In Europe, regardless of how crowded it was, order was maintained. But here, Chinese travelers were shouting and cutting. The line was the norm. As Marco tried to find a spot to queue, a family suddenly cut in front of him, seemingly oblivious. "Excuse me, I was here first," Marco said politely in English. The family replied in Chinese and completely ignored him. Their child even kicked Marco's suitcase. Unbelievable, Marco thought. In Italy, even children had basic manners, but here neither parents nor children showed any consideration for others. 3 hours later, Marco finally cleared immigration and dragged his weary body towards the restroom. The scene there shocked him even more. A man was openly smoking inside a cubicle. "This is an airport, it should be non-smoking," Marco couldn't help but say. The man glared fiercely at Marco, swore at him in Chinese, and intimidated by the intensity, Marco hurriedly left the restroom. Barbaric. This was a scene utterly impossible in Europe. To make matters worse, a further humiliation awaited him at the taxi stand. As Marco waited in line, a taxi arrived. Suddenly, a Chinese family rushed out from the side, pushed Marco aside, and confidently got into the car. I was waiting here, Marco protested desperately, but even the driver laughed, with the family ignoring Marco completely. Is this the reality of Asia? Marco was shocked. In Italy, even with a language barrier, basic decency was universal. But China was different. It was a world where the strong, the loud, and the shameless prevailed. A deep sense of disappointment spread through Marco. Canada will probably be the same, Marco thought despairingly about his next destination. Asia is just full of people with low standards, no matter where you go. Marco was still unaware that in just 1 week, his values would be turned upside down. The humiliations in China were merely a prelude to the immense emotional experience awaiting him in Canada. Marco's week in China was a nightmare. Whether in Beijing or Shanghai, the situation did not improve. He was ignored when ordering in restaurants. His broken hotel room fixture was met with a "we'll fix it tomorrow." He was overcharged at tourist sites and met with indifference when asking for directions. That's enough. Marco was thoroughly fed up. I feel bad for Francesca, but let's cancel Canada and fly back to Italy. However, the flight to Toronto was already booked. Considering the cancellation fees, it was cheaper to stick to the plan. Whatever, Canada will be similar anyway. Marco had given up. Since they were in the same region, he expected nothing. Even boarding the flight to Toronto Pearson International Airport (YYZ), the Chinese ground staff's attitude was appalling. The employee checking the boarding pass handed Marco's passport back to him like a piece of garbage and coldly uttered, "Next." On the plane, Chinese passengers spoke loudly for 2 hours, giving Marco a headache. "This is it. After this Canadian trip, I am never coming back to Asia," Marco swore to himself. The plane landed at Pearson Airport. However, the moment he stepped off the aircraft, Marco noticed a difference: the air. Chinese airports were always filled with a heavy, stuffy atmosphere, but the air at Pearson felt clear and for some reason comfortable. Is it just my imagination? Marco wondered, shaking his head. On the way to immigration, he was stunned by something even more unexpected. The signs were not only in English and French, Canada's official languages, but also in multiple languages, including Spanish, and, astonishingly, they had prepared signs in Italian. No way, Marco couldn't believe his eyes. In many places in China, even the English signs were incorrect. But here in Canada, his own mother tongue was considered. It's just Pearson, though. It's an international hub, Marco tried to convince himself. Yet as he approached the immigration gates, a bigger surprise awaited him. In China, there were only a few officers with cold demeanors. In Canada, over a dozen staff members were stationed, all smiling as they guided travelers. "Welcome, sir. Which line are you taking?" A staff member named Chris Chen spoke to Marco in fluent English. The smile wasn't forced, it conveyed a genuine welcome. "Which queue is for foreigners?" Marco, still confused, asked. In China, even asking a question felt difficult. "This way, sir, I'll walk you down." Mr. Chen politely escorted Marco all the way to the end of the line. "Please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions." That level of kindness astounded Marco. While waiting, he saw a Spanish couple ahead struggling. They didn't seem to speak English and were having difficulty communicating with the staff. In China, they would have been completely ignored. But in Canada, Mr. Chen called on his radio and a Spanish-speaking employee, Miss Lee, immediately rushed over. "Can I help you?" Hearing Miss Lee's fluent Spanish, the couple visibly relaxed. Marco was deeply impacted by this scene. They have staff who can handle Spanish. Even in Italian airports, it's rare to have employees who can manage this many languages, but in Canada, it seemed like a standard setup. Marco was amazed. What kind of education system does Canada have? Even more surprising was the speed. The immigration process that took 3 hours in China was completed in a mere 20 minutes in Canada. Efficient yet attentive to every individual, Marco was moved by this level of service that managed to achieve both. Is this Canada's real strength? This was the moment the first major crack appeared in Marco's rigid stereotypes. Although immigration was complete, a sense of stubborn refusal still churned within Marco. The airport is the country's face. Of course they'd put in the effort, Marco tried to rationalize. But once I get to the city, it'll probably be just like China. Marco's inner turmoil continued as he boarded the UP Express Union Pearson Express to downtown Toronto. The train was on time and clean, but Marco thought, it's just because this is Toronto. It's the capital hub. Milan is also completely different from the rest of Italy. On the train, Marco observed the Canadians around him. He recalled the Chinese trains where people spoke loudly on their phones, creating a lot of noise. However, the Canadian train was strikingly quiet. People on the phone spoke softly, and some didn't answer calls at all, replying via text instead. I must admit it is quiet, Marco conceded. But he immediately shifted his thinking. It's just because Canadians are more reserved, not passionate like Italians. They must be bottling up their dissatisfaction. Arriving at Union Station in Toronto, Marco was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of people. The population density was comparable to China's urban areas. See, it's crowded. There must be a lot of annoyed and anxious people. Yet the reality contradicted his expectations. Despite the immense crowd, there was no pushing or bumping. On the escalators, everyone automatically stood on the right, leaving the left side open for those in a hurry. At the ticket gates, people queued orderly. How is this possible? Marco was confused. In China, the more people there were, the worse the chaos. But in Canada, even with the crowds, order prevailed. On his way to the hotel, Marco got lost. As he stood staring at his map, a passing older Canadian man approached him. Hello, sir. Need help? Where are you trying to go? The man spoke with a thick accent, perhaps French-Canadian or a second-language English speaker, but tried hard to explain the way to the hotel. Finally, he even used his smartphone's translation app to give Marco detailed walking directions. In China, asking for directions often led to indifference, but in Canada, someone was willing to be so kind to a complete stranger. This is just a coincidence, Marco stubbornly thought. I just happened to meet a kind person. Not all Canadians are like this. Checking into the hotel, the front desk service was flawless. Fluent English and French detailed explanations and a sincere smile, a stark contrast to the hotels in China. It's probably just a high-end hotel. Marco desperately searched for an excuse. If you pay enough, you get good service anywhere. However, at breakfast the next day, Marco's conviction was shaken again. The server, upon learning Marco was Italian, greeted him in Italian buongiorno and then continued the conversation in fluent English. You're from Italy, I went to Rome, it's such a great city. Marco was moved. In China, he felt openly discriminated against for being a foreigner. In Canada, he felt celebrated for it. This is just the hotel's service manual, Marco told himself. It's the hospitality industry. This is a given. Yet deep down, his view of Canada had begun to subtly change. But I can't conclude anything yet. I need more time to understand the real Canada. Marco was still unable to openly admit the truth about Canada. His pride in his homeland and his prejudice against Asia prevented him from accepting the reality before his eyes. Visiting the Royal Ontario Museum ROM, Marco was exposed to the depth of Canada's diverse history and culture. However, complex feelings still churned within him. The artifacts are nice, but Europe has older buildings, Marco thought as he took photos. The Colosseum is 2000 years old. These are still relatively new. Yet, in the museum courtyard, Marco witnessed an interesting scene. Despite the presence of large groups of foreign tourists, the Canadians themselves were unbothered enjoying the quiet contemplation. In China's tourist spots, the locals would become irritated when foreigners appeared. But in Canada, many locals actively helped foreigners who seemed lost. Would you like me to take your picture? An older Canadian woman approached Marco in English. She was not a tourist guide but a local visitor. Thank you very much, Marco replied, but he felt complex emotions. The kindness is nice, but it's probably just a facade. They must think foreign tourists are annoying. For lunch, he walked into a popular neighborhood eatery, a deli, sandwich shop. There Marco had another shocking experience. The menu had English, but Marco intentionally pointed to a complex item and tried to order it in a mix of bad English and Italian. The staff member, initially confused, immediately consulted with the owner. In a Chinese restaurant, a misunderstanding would likely lead to being ignored or served a random dish. But this shop was different. The owner himself came out from the kitchen holding up actual cuts of meat and explained to him, this is the brisket, this is the sirloin, using careful, simple English. What was even more surprising was that the owner noticed the portion Marco had ordered might be too much, and kindly warned him it might be too large for one person. This attitude of putting the customer's well-being above immediate profit deeply moved Marco. But this is just a small family-run business, Marco tried desperately to rationalize. A large corporation would be different. The next day, Marco visited a large electronics store, Canada Computers. There, he witnessed the strength of Canadian customer service and technological knowledge. The latest products were indeed as advanced as Europe's. But what amazed Marco most was the professionalism of the salespeople. "Tell me the difference between this product and the European one," Marco asked in English. The salesman immediately prepared a detailed comparison sheet. Furthermore, upon learning Marco was Italian, the salesman kindly reminded him Italy's voltage is 220 volts. "You will need a converter." They weren't just selling products, they were genuinely thinking about whether the customer would be truly satisfied. Marco was deeply touched by this attitude. In the evening, a small incident occurred while walking in High Park. A Canadian student noticed a wallet dropped by a foreign tourist. In China, it would have surely been taken. But the student without hesitation took the wallet straight to the park's ranger office. Marco witnessed the entire process. Why didn't they take the money? Marco found it incomprehensible. In Italy, people who return wallets exist but are not common. In Canada, it seemed like the natural thing to do. The ranger dealt with it as casually as a routine matter. What are the people in this place thinking? Marco was confused. Choosing morality over profit, valuing care over efficiency, these Canadian values were touching Marco's heart bit by bit. But can this really be sustained? Marco still couldn't be entirely convinced, thinking it must be economically inefficient. Yet deep down, a worry began to surface. Have I missed something important? The contradiction between his deeply held values and the reality before him forced a fundamental reevaluation of his life. On his final evening in Old Quebec City, Marco had a life-changing experience. He was having dinner at a small, traditional restaurant. As he walked back to his hotel, a light rain began to fall. Marco didn't have an umbrella. This is annoying. Just as he was looking for a taxi, a voice came from behind him. "Sir, you'll get soaked like that." He turned to see an older Quebecois man, about 60 years old. The man, without hesitation, offered Marco his own umbrella. "But then you'll get soaked," Marco resisted in English. "It's fine, I'm Canadian, I'm used to the rain," the man replied with a gentle smile. "Besides, you are our important guest." That sentence deeply shook Marco. Calling a complete stranger, a foreigner, an important guest, where did this genuine warmth come from? "Thank you, but why?" Marco asked, utterly confused. The man began to speak quietly. "We have something here called l'esprit de communauté, the spirit of community. It means we naturally care for others, thinking from the other person's perspective, what can I do for them? And it's not for repayment." The man explained slowly and carefully. "We say toute rencontre est une chance. Every encounter is a chance. It means our meeting right now is a rare opportunity. That's why we want to cherish this moment." Marco was deeply moved by these words. In China, he was discriminated against for being a foreigner. In Canada, he was cherished because he was a foreigner. "Why are you so kind to me?" Marco asked honestly. The man paused, then replied, "I learned one thing from my grandfather. Humans can't live alone, so we have to help each other. This is not just between Canadians. All people in the world are like family, really." At that instant, tears welled up in Marco's eyes. For the first time, he understood the root of the Canadian kindness he had experienced until now. It wasn't superficial service. It was genuine care based on a profound spirituality. "I was wrong, Marco," confessed his voice trembling. "I underestimated Asia, and I completely misunderstood Canada." The man smiled gently. "It's okay. Everyone starts with many misunderstandings. The important thing is to have a willing heart." That night, back at his hotel, Marco cried alone for a long time. Shame, moving, gratitude, and profound thankfulness welled up inside him. The next morning, Marco had one final surprise at the train station. He saw the cleaning crew servicing the carriages. In just a few minutes, they perfectly cleaned over 300 seats. And after the cleaning was finished, the entire crew bowed to the platform, ready to welcome the passengers. These people are working with pride. Marco was deeply impressed. He realized this was the Canadian spirit pursuing the highest standards, regardless of the job. Inside the train carriage, Marco looked out at the passing landscape, thinking, "What did I think I knew? I judged based on superficial information and held prejudices without understanding the real Canada." As the vibrant green fields came into view, Marco made a silent vow. "I must tell more people about this experience. I have to let the world know the beauty of Canada." Arriving at Pearson Airport, Marco apologized to the airport staff. "Thank you very much. My time in Canada has changed my life. The staff member replied happily, "It was our pleasure to help you, sir. We welcome you back to Canada." Looking back at the departure gate, Marco felt a profound love for Canada. He made a strong decision to take everything he had learned here back home. Returning to Italy, Marco's first report was to his girlfriend Francesca. "Thanks to you, my life has changed. This gift was the best gift I could have received." Marco's eyes shone with a new certainty. "Only after comparing China and Canada did I first understand what true civilization is." Francesca was amazed. The Marco standing before her was completely different from the one who had left. "I learned one thing from the Canadians," Marco began quietly. "True richness is not just material wealth. The richness of the heart, the maturity of the spirit, that is the most important thing." The next day, Marco gathered his friends and told them of his experience. "You probably won't believe me, but Canada is a near-perfect country." His friend Luca laughed. "How is that possible? Every country has problems." But Marco was serious. "I thought so too at first, but I realized it after experiencing it myself." Marco shared specific examples one after another: the flawless airport service, the order and efficiency of the city, the people's care and honesty, and most importantly, the kindness that sought no reward. All of this is rooted in a profound culture, an esprit de communauté that cannot be achieved by superficial imitation. Marco's passionate speech slowly captivated his friends. "Was your experience really that good?" "Absolutely, without a doubt," Marco asserted. "Actually, I filmed a video." Marco pulled out his smartphone and started playing the video he had recorded in Canada. The attentive airport staff, the man who gave him an umbrella on the street, the train cleaning crew's professional work, and finally, Marco himself, tearfully confessing his gratitude. "I was wrong. Canada changed my life. I want to share this experience with more people." His friends were deeply moved after watching the video. "Marco, why don't you upload this to social media?" Luca suggested. "The whole world needs to see this." Marco hesitated. "But I'm not famous." "It doesn't matter," Francesca encouraged him. "Your experience will surely touch many hearts." That night, Marco gathered his courage and uploaded the video. The title was "True Civilization Learned in Canada." At first, he thought only family and friends would watch. But when he woke up the next morning, the view count had exceeded 100,000. The comment section was flooded with messages of thanks from all over the world. "I want to visit Canada too, Mr. Rossi's experience deeply moved me. As a Canadian, I feel proud." 1 week later, the video views surpassed 1 million. Interview requests from TV stations and media outlets snowballed towards Marco. "This is what I wanted to convey." Marco felt satisfied. It's not a superficial comparison, but a fundamental difference in values. There is so much to learn from Canada. 6 months later, Marco visited Canada again, this time with Francesca. At Toronto Pearson Airport, he coincidentally met the staff member Chris Chen again. "You're back," Mr. Chen smiled brightly. "What you said that day changed my life." Marco bowed deeply. "This time, I want to share the beauty of Canada with my loved one." Afterward, Marco began working on cultural exchange activities connecting Canada and Italy. His video continues to be loved by people all over the world. True international understanding begins with letting go of prejudice and attempting to understand the other. This was the most important lesson Marco learned in Canada.